My name is Lynette, and I recently moved to a rural town to the north of New Orleans called Albany. And I think that I'm going to move soon. I'm a survivor by trade and I work outside most of the time. The office where I previously worked in Baton Rouge went through some upheaval under new leadership, and those of us that weren't experienced enough to stay, but too experienced to simply let go, were transferred all over the damn state. I got stuck working out here in the middle of nowhere because I'm both young and recently competent, which is fine, as I'm not a big party person and I mostly game for a hobby. I know that you're probably thinking that surveyor is an odd choice of a career for a gamer who likes the indoors, but to that, I submit that I almost exclusively work alone, with very little direct interaction with other coworkers, let alone the public. But honestly though, these days I'm glad that I have close neighbors, and that Albany is big enough to have a couple of restaurants and a grocery store. I wouldn't want to be living out here, this close to the woods, without someone in screaming distance, especially not after what I've witnessed in the 6 months since I moved here. Technically speaking, the strangeness began the day I moved in. I was trying to get this couch up my stairs alone, which I was not handling well. I'm a mighty enough chick when I need to be, but the two knuckleheads who were supposed to be helping me decided to bail at the last minute, which still pisses me off. But whatever. I'm trying to haul this couch up the stairs, and the apartment complex is one of those open-air deals, so there's some people walking around going about their business. I was just about to give up and throw it back into the truck when I heard this odd, heavy accented voice behind me asking if I needed help. I knew immediately from the accent that the person was either themselves Haitian or raised in that kind of community. I'd not had a lot of interaction with those people in Baton Rouge, and I thought it was odd hearing it outside of New Orleans, which is where I associated the accent with. When I turned around, I was even more surprised to see that this guy was dressed in white, head to toe, and he wore a satin sash on his head. Now at first, I was a little weirded out, because I hadn't heard him walk up, and for a second, I thought he was like a creeper, but his smile and concerned look won me over, and I accepted his help. With two, the couch went into my apartment quickly, and when we took a breather, I offered him a beer, in which he accepted. We talked briefly and he told me his name was Jean Baptiste, but that people around there just called him Sean. He asked me a bunch of surface questions about myself, my name, where I was from, why I'd moved there, and for a minute, I thought he was just plain old trying to get in my pants, which I only kind of minded, but as he finished the beer, he told me that he had to go. Before he left though, this guy turned around and told me that I shouldn't go exploring in the woods around Albany on my own, and went on to say that it was very dangerous. At first, for just a second, I thought he was threatening me, but I again realized that he was just genuinely concerned. I was flabbergasted, to say the least, at his insistence, and didn't even respond for a second. I eventually found my voice and explained to him that staying out of any of the woods in the area might be out of the question, given my occupation. When I told him what I did for a living, he kind of did a double take, and then considered it. "Truly?" Jean Baptiste asked me sincerely, almost like he didn't believe me, or was making sure I was serious. When I insisted that I was specifically a forest surveyor, he seemed to get a little nervous. Then he asked me something really odd. "Would you allow me to pray over you?" Sean asked me in sincere concern as he put his beer bottle down and took a deep breath. The way he was looking at me was uncomfortable, but not in a creeper kind of way. It was like when my dad would ask me too many questions about going to a party because he was worried about me. It was vaguely comforting, annoying, and, in case of Sean, unnerving all the same time. I didn't know what else to do, and he'd been so kind and helpful about the couch, I just said, sure, and let him do his blessing, which involved him praying over me with open palms in another language. It only took a minute or so, but it was still longer than I'd expected, and I knew that the prayer was a sincere one. When he finished, he touched my shoulder and told me to be careful out there. Then he left. And here's the kicker. I haven't seen him since. Not at the apartment complex or in town, or even on my stints into the woods, of which there have been more than a few. Jean Baptiste appeared out of nowhere, helped me with my couch, drank a beer with me, said a prayer over me, and then disappeared. Now, that may all just be a matter of circumstance, coincidence, or simply that he wasn't actually from Albany, but it's still very, very odd. I should have seen him again, at least in passing, if he was supposed to be at my apartment complex with any regularity. It was also far from the last strange thing to occur since I'd moved in. Not by far. It took me more than a week to get settled into my place, and another week or so to get my bearings in Albany. I still don't know where everything is, but I learned to get downtown, where the 2 pizza places in town are. Our office in town is actually bigger than the main office in Baton Rouge, but I do my level best to stay out of the office, which suits my new boss just fine, because he actually hates doing the surveying part of being a surveyor. The next strange event involved a run-in with a wild animal that scared the living shit out of me. About 3 weeks after I moved in, I walked out of my apartment and caught something out of my periphery. It was a dark shape just on the edge of the doorframe, and when I turned and saw the shocking dark and light pattern of scales only about 6 inches from my face, I freaked out and practically dove through my door. When I turned around, after scrambling to get away from what turned out to be a huge goddamn python, I held onto the rail overlooking the courtyard, just staring at the thing. It was huge, and its body ran the entire length of the frame of my front door, and if I hadn't been paying attention, I would have tripped over the thing. For the snake's part, it just turned its head and looked at me, but it didn't otherwise move. I stared at it for what felt like forever, caught somewhere between abject terror and morbid curiosity. I kind of wanted to touch it, but I didn't want to get bitten, or worse. I also didn't want to move past it again to get back into my house, so I edged sideways, away from my door like a crazy person. Once I was far enough away from my door that I didn't expect the python would lash out, I ran down the stairs to my car, got inside, and called animal control. We don't have a dedicated animal control officer in Albany, so I had to wait for like an hour for one to show up from the parish office. He was really nice and reassuring, and told me that this kind of thing happens a lot. It didn't take long at all for the officer to get the snake into a big bin, but he did have to go back to his truck for that bin, as the one he'd brought was way too small for the big son of a bitch. He told me that the snake was unusually docile, and that it likely escaped from a house where someone was keeping him as a pet. I asked him whether pythons were native to Louisiana, because I'd heard that they were, and he explained that no python of any kind is native to the U.S., but that the Burmese python was an invasive species common to Florida, Louisiana, and a lot of the Southeast. And that's when the animal control officer told me something weird about that particular snake. It wasn't the Burmese python. He said that it was a royal or ball python, which is why I was so sure that it was someone's pet, because royal pythons are native only to this one narrow strip in southern Africa, and that they weren't even invasive here. When he told me this, my mind immediately went to Jean Baptiste, and I remember feeling a chill run through me. The officer, Nate was his name, I think, he took care of the snake and then left, but I didn't exit or enter my apartment without fear for like a week after that. Every single time I came out of the door, I checked all around, just to make sure another wasn't hiding. I was also honestly worried about other animals, because there's a lot of random dangerous stuff down here, like those huge wasps. Screw those things. I hate them. Anyway, with the python dealt with, I tried to push it from my mind and focus on work. The Albany office had a huge backlog because, as I said, my boss at the surveyor's office hates surveying. So I got plenty busy, and in a hurry. The first month or so after I got settled in was kind of non-stop trips out to residential and commercial properties in town, assessing easements and the like. I also had a few that were out of town and in more rural locations, which living in Albany is saying something. There were at least 2 jobs where there was no point of contact, and I had to wander around a patch of land roughly half a football field wide on my own to get my measurements. Another one had me lost in a collection of small, derelict sheds, which felt like a damned maze. It was here that the third odd occurrence took place. I had finished measuring the western property line of what I think at one time had to be a storage facility. It was just a grid of these old aluminum sheds, all so damaged I could probably have collapsed them with a ball-peen hammer, but all locked up with padlocks older than my car. I was genuinely lost at this juncture, and I'm kind of getting nervous when I spot one of the sheds was wide open, and I could see a light coming from inside of it. The light inside the shed wasn't from a lamp or a flashlight or any kind of electric light at all. It looked very much like an open flame, and I worried that some crackhead had left something burning inside. It definitely wouldn't have been the first time something like that happened, and I've personally put out my share of open flames that could have started wildfires in my time. And so, with a heavy sigh, I moved over to the shed to take a better look. Before I got more than 20 feet from the doorway, someone burst out of the shed like they heard me coming or something. It was this wild-eyed dude with red pants and no shoes. And I shit you not, this dude hissed at me like a cat and then bolted from the area like a gazelle. He ran clear out until he hit the tree line and utterly disappeared. Man, I was so scared I didn't even move. But then my eyes caught a glimpse of what was in the shed. There was some kind of bizarre altar inside of the place with melted candles and feathers and some other shit all over it. 5 candles were lit and placed at different heights all over the thing, and some kind of dead animal was laying on top of it, with a knife sticking out of it. I didn't even hesitate when I saw it and just ran as fast as I could in the opposite direction of where the guy had run. When I finally found a road, I just called the cops and explained everything, and they sent someone out. Immediately after, called the property owner, who had no clue what I was talking about, and he came out as well. The cops found the shed in question and took care of the candles, but were really hush-hush about everything else. It was strange. They were nice enough, but I got the distinct impression that they knew a whole hell of a lot more about what they found than they were letting on. The property owner was grateful that I'd found the candles, because it could have started a fire, but they were also just glad to be aware that someone was in their sheds. They went ahead and asked the police to search all of the other ones, which I thought was prudent, and they didn't argue. One of them escorted me to my car before warning me that I should probably avoid the property for a while, which wasn't going to be a problem. Now, after this event, a lot of weird stuff started happening near my apartment. I kept finding dead animals outside my apartment door. At first, it was just a dead bug. No worries, right? Well, then I found a sparrow, and then a woodpecker, until I eventually came outside and found a dead rat on my car. Needless to say, I was really freaking out at this point, and I half expected to find a dead cat next. But that wasn't the end of it. One morning I came out of my apartment, and on the walkway between two pegs and the railing, I spotted this little trinket. If I hadn't caught it out of my periphery going down the stairs, I'd have missed it entirely. It was this little human-shaped effigy made out of twigs and hair and all kinds of gunk. It smelled pretty fucking weird, even at a distance. And so I flipped shit right there and I screamed when I saw the thing, which I knew was a voodoo doll. I was so animated and loud, I startled my neighbor who was getting into her car. When she looked up at me, I ran down to her and told her what I'd seen. And all she said was, "Don't touch it." Then just got into her car and left, avoiding eye contact with me as she drove out of the parking lot. I immediately called the cops, who were really supportive, and told me that they'd send a patrol car to watch my complex over the next week. But with no clear crime or perpetrator, there wasn't a lot that they could do. They did document everything visually, and took a lot more pictures of the rat than even I thought was necessary. But again, it felt like they knew a bit more what was going on than they let on. Now, after this instance, I started seeing a lot more insects and creepy crawlers near and in my apartment than usual. I found a bunch of lizards inside the house, which was odd, as they don't tend to like the AC, which I always have on. Birds kept hitting the windows at odd hours. One slammed into my front window and broke its neck at like 9 o'clock at night. Just a lot of weird, abnormal stuff like that. One night, while I was playing Skyrim and really in the zone, I felt something crawl across my foot and nearly ripped my whole rig up trying to get out of the room. It was the biggest spider I'd ever seen in any home that I'd lived in, and I lost it for like an hour. I eventually found it and caught it in a cup to put outside, but I lost a lot of damn sleep that night. And so, at this point, I was pretty genuinely scared to stay home alone. But I was also worried that someone was following me, and I was nervous to just go out and do my job. I told my boss all about it, and this guy just hands me over a gun. I mean, damn, I love the South. It was kind of a weird 9mm revolver, which I'd never seen before, but I took it because, again, I was pretty scared. Okay, so cut to last week. It was the end of November, so it's getting cold enough that most of the animals and other difficult wildlife are either hibernating, overwintering, or just plain gone. It's this time of year that my company takes care of the majority of its more rural and difficult to get to clients. So I wind up driving the company truck out to this wooded, uncleared property, a touch further outside of town than I'd like. I drive out there and realize that there's a pond, a lot of timber, and it's going to be a lot of legwork and a long day. So I stopped and just changed into some overalls and some better boots, which I've gotten pretty adept at doing in my truck. It's broad daylight, so I wasn't super concerned, but I slipped that 9mm into my work bag all the same. I got out of the truck and immediately felt like something was off. Like there were eyes on me the second my boots hit the grass. I just tried to push it out of my mind and do my job, but the further I went onto this property, the worse the feeling got. This entire time I'm at this property, I kept running into snakes, spiders, lizards, hell, you name it. If it wasn't supposed to be out at that time of year, sure enough, I ran into it. At one point, I was trying to lift my heavy bag with my total station, which is this, big-ass camera thing that we use to scan the area of a location. If you've ever seen a surveyor out with a big yellow thing on a tripod, that's a total station. Anyway, I climbed over this log, and I ran, face first, right into a spider web, and when I felt the thing crawling on my face, I lost it, and I dropped all of my shit. I screamed and smacked at my face, terrified that it was going to bite my eye, because that's where I'd felt it. And finally, I got the damn thing off of me and I just threw it. As I kind of came to and looked around, I realized that I wasn't sure which way my truck was. What's more, when I looked down where I dropped my total station, I found that it landed hard and broke on the other side of the log. Now, I was upset because those things are not cheap, and it's going to have to come out of my check, which is not a lot of money at all. I climbed over the log to see what it could have landed on that was hard enough to break it. And that's when I found this weird structure made of local stones stacked on top of each other. On and around this thing, which looked like another altar, were a bunch of jars filled with a strange yellow powder, which was also all over the place. That's when I realized that some of the jars are broken, and that's why the powder is all over. My damn station had landed on them and broken them. My eyes went wide in concern because I didn't know what this meant, but I knew it was bad. I picked up the tripod and I just stared at the powder, which was blasted all over the altar. I made the connection to voodoo then, but I free associated and initially thought that the powder was some kind of drug. The instant that thought came into my head, I heard the most insane hyena unhinged laughter that I've ever heard in my life. It came from multiple sources and from all directions. It was like there were clowns everywhere, in the distance, right next to me, in the trees, and they were all laughing at me. I bolted and took off as fast as I could in the direction I'd come from, and almost broke my ankle twice trying to outrun the laughter, which just seemed to match my pace. I burst from the trees and through the total station into the back of the truck. I got to the car door and chanced to look back as I opened it, only to freeze in place when I saw half a dozen black shapes lurking in the trees. They were faceless, formless shadows, but they were damn solid, and they just lingered at the edge of the road and seemed to stare right into me. The sounds of the woods had died down then, and the only thing I could hear was my own heavy breathing. All I could do was stare back into the forest at these shades, which seemed to not wish me to leave, until finally they spoke, but not to laugh at me. They said only one phrase, but it made my heart sink and my stomach turn over. Thank you. Every single fiber of my being screamed at me to leave, and I listened. I jumped into the truck, turned the key, and took off as fast as I could. The entire time I could see all of them, the shadow people, in my periphery. They'd come right up to my truck, right up to the windows, and the laughter started again. I kept hearing the laughter until I was about a mile away, but I didn't stop, and I sped all the way back to town. I drove directly to the police department and asked for the officer who'd come out when I'd found the doll. I told him everything that had happened at the property, and I didn't hold back because I needed to hear myself say it out loud. I told him all of it, everything that had happened since I moved. But when I told him about Jean Baptiste, he looked struck. He asked me the name again, and I told him that Jean Baptiste had helped me with my couch. This cop then looked at me weird, looked around like he's checking to see who's listening, then leaned in and told me that the man I described had been dead for 5 years. He goes on to tell me that he was a voodoo priest who moved there from New Orleans, and that he was a really good person, and who'd done a lot of good works both in the city and in Albany. He told me that Jean Baptiste had been murdered, but they never found out who had done it. Now apparently the detective who'd investigated the murder had told this officer that whatever cult or gang Jean Baptiste was running from had followed him, and it was they who'd killed him. I just about threw up in this cop's trash can when he told me all of this, but managed to hold it together. He admitted freely that he had no idea how to advise me, but that he and another officer would investigate the area that I'd indicated, and that they'd both personally patrol both there and near my apartment for the next few weeks. And my mind reeled when I left that police station, and it's still reeling. I took the total station back to my boss, who was not very understanding until I told him about the jars. And then he got very, very quiet and told me not to worry about it, which is how I know that he'd known something about it as well. I don't blame him for not saying anything, because what do you say? Hey, new girl, good work today. Oh, and by the way, there's a murderous voodoo cult in town. Yeah, watch out for that. Nah, not likely. At least he gave me the gun, which I'm not sure I won't have to use before all of this is over. Now I realize now, as I'm writing all of this out, whoever that guy in the shed was, the only reason he didn't kill me is because of Jean Baptiste's blessing. I know that in my heart. The rest, the jars and everything else, I don't know, but I don't think I'm sticking around to find out. There's plenty of places who need surveyors, and I'm at this point that I'm fine with being in debt over all of this for the next year if I have to. I've got nowhere to go in the short term, though, as my parents are gone and my sister lives in Michigan, which may be my next stop, because a complete change of scenery feels exactly what's necessary. What I keep obsessing over is the one thing that was the least frightening, but also the one thing I simply can't explain. Jean Baptiste himself. Was that him? If not, then who was it? If it was him, did he just fake his death to throw off his pursuers? Or was he like a ghost? If he was a ghost, how did he effectively help me with the couch? I mean, can ghosts even move shit like that? If they can move a couch and drink a beer, they can do whatever the hell they like, which is quite terrifying, and it makes me think of those shadows in the woods. More than anything, what I keep dwelling on is the advice he gave me, which I so desperately wish I'd heeded. You gotta stay out of these woods around here, child.